Dear friends, welcome to another episode in the fantastic world of the military. In this video, we'll discuss two forceful statements. One from the French Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, who stated that France will not let Russia win in Ukraine, and another from Vladimir Putin, claiming that Russian nuclear weapons are ready. France and Russia are at a tension peak. On Tuesday, March 11th, French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal declared before the French Parliament that the Russian invasion of Ukraine had reached a turning point, further warning that a Russian victory in Ukraine would pose a real and tangible danger to France and all French people. In his speech, the French Prime Minister stated that to support Ukraine's defense, no option should be ruled out. Attal's words reinforce President Macron's statements, who has been repeating since the end of February that no support solution for Ukraine should be dismissed, including sending European soldiers. On that occasion, Macron said that France's goal is to prevent a Russian victory in Ukraine at all costs, with Attal echoing the same sentiment on Tuesday, emphasizing how concerning a Russian victory in Ukraine would be a tremendous risk for France, the French, and all Europeans. Vladimir Putin quickly responded to President Macron and Prime Minister Attal's declarations. In an interview for a Russian state channel, Putin assured that the Russian nuclear triad was the most advanced in the world and that if Russian territorial integrity were in danger, he would not hesitate to use it. The nuclear triad refers to the air, land, and naval means a nation has at its disposal to launch its nuclear weapons. Currently, only the United States, Russia, France, China, India, and Israel possess a nuclear triad, meaning only this select group of 6 countries is capable of launching their warheads from land, sea, and air. Through the nuclear triad, a country ensures that even if a surprise attack destroys all its land and air launchers, there will still be sea launchers, usually submarines, ready to retaliate in kind. If nuclear weapons represent the greatest and most efficient deterrent, the nuclear triad is the apex of deterrence. The French statements, anticipating the deployment of European soldiers to Ukraine and the usual, yet equally concerning Russian nuclear threats, mean the world is closer to a war directly involving Russia and the West, a war that, it's important to remember, involving nuclear powers, could escalate into a global nuclear conflict. The answer is not necessarily. Even if France manages to convince other European countries to send troops to Ukraine, the French have made it clear that the mission of these troops would not be combat at the front lines, being limited to training missions, border defense, or at most, air defense operations. Clearly, once these military personnel are in Ukraine, they will become legitimate targets, and even if they are far from the front lines, it's inevitable that some will be wounded or even killed in Russian missile attacks. But what many fear is that Russia will start to see the countries of origin of those soldiers as legitimate targets as well. For example, in a scenario where France sends soldiers to the Ukrainian rear, if Russia interprets this as France's official entry into the conflict, Putin might feel entitled to directly attack the origin of those soldiers. That is, France, a country that, it's important to remember, is a full member of NATO. In this scenario of a Russian attack against a NATO member, France could activate Article 5, obliging all members to come to its aid. If that happens, a conflict that is now regional and limited to Ukraine would become a European conflict, potentially worldwide. In his statement, Attal also reinforced other words from Macron, saying that a Russian victory in Ukraine is a threat to France, the French, and all of Europe. But how can a war in the far east of Europe represent such a great risk to the French and Europe? It's important to recall that just days before the Russian invasion, Macron was the European leader who made the most effort to try to convince Putin not to go to war. Macron made several calls to Putin and even held a summit between the two leaders in Moscow. Therefore, Macron knows better than any other European leader that Putin is not a trustworthy man. And Macron also knows very well that the reason behind the Russian invasion was never NATO or a supposed fight against Nazism. Macron and his prime minister know that what led Putin to attack was the Russian desire for expansion and territorial annexation. And that's why they know well that if Putin emerges victorious from Ukraine, he won't stop there. He will continue advancing, first against non-NATO members like Georgia, Moldova, and Armenia, and then against the more peripheral members of the alliance itself, like Finland and the Baltic countries. For France, if Putin is not confronted now, he will inevitably end up being confronted in some other European country. Therefore, for Macron and Attal, the best course of action is to face and block Putin where he is at this moment, namely, in Ukraine. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any news, criticisms, ideas, or suggestions. You can leave them in the comments.
L'Ukraine perd, nous perdons nous aussi. Nous ne laisserons pas la Russie gagner. La France ne peut s'effacer devant ses responsabilités. Alors, je le dis ici, en tant que Premier ministre de la France, au nom du gouvernement de la France, à la tribune de l'Assemblée nationale de la France, je le dis au plus profond de mon cœur, qui résonne et qui bat pour la valeur de liberté des peuples. Je le dis du plus profond de mes tripes qui se nouent autour de l'intérêt des Français. Slava Ukraini!